The earliest epic tales survived for centuries by telling from this period valued the story we're going to read is called Beowulf. It's about this guy, really burly, like strong, heroic guy who has to come in and sweep in and save this nation from its doom and its death and its destruction. And he's going to be awesome. And he loves Beowulf. Beowulf loves Beowulf. To start out our poetry unit, we have to talk about the very beginnings of the English language as we know it. And we're going to be spending some time in medieval Europe, starting around 449 AD. Now, we know this time period was a period of civil unrest and a lot of invasion was happening. There wasn't any kind of democracy or organized government. People just kind of took over land, and based on how much land you had, that equated to how much power you had. Around 449 AD, there were three major groups: the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes. We don't really talk about the Jutes because they were so minor and faded out pretty quickly, but the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes invaded land. Specifically, they started invading what is now modern day Britain, and that invasion led to a change in culture and a change in language and a change of the way of life, and it turned into what we call the Anglo-Saxon period. That period lasted from around 449 AD to 1066 AD. The heaviest influence on language in this time period was adding a lot of Germanic words to what was already known as the English language. It was known as something called Old English. That included a lot of harsher sounds. There were no silent letters, unlike what we see today. Grammatically, it was much more complex. And a big characteristic of this time period and of Old English was that they didn't write things down to record them and preserve them. There was no writing system at the time, so they couldn't just simply write something down in a book or print it and have it and preserve it forever. So what they did to preserve these stories, they told them to each other time after time after time. And those stories were passed down from generation to generation through storytelling. In order for oral poets to be able to remember their writings and to make it more entertaining for the people, so it was more memorable, they wrote it in poetic form. Epic poems, which is what we're going to study, told about warriors and great strength and great violence and great perseverance. Lyric poems were shorter and just kind of were sing-songy and were celebratory, really. And then, of course, there were riddles just to keep people entertained. At the beginning of this time period, paganism was still a main source of religion. So people believed in the earth and they believed in the power of nature. They believed in multiple gods that had specific areas that they focused on. So perhaps there was a god of war, a god of nature, etc. This period valued violence and being rich and famous over anything else. There was no Christianity yet. That was coming. That was being influenced over time. However, because it was a paganism religion, they didn't believe in an afterlife. So there was no hope for what was going to happen after people died. They very much lived in the present, and they knew that in order for them to build a legacy, they had to make their identity known in that present moment. So we'll see a lot of stories and a lot of tales of people who are larger than life and who are these giant heroes who save the day and sweep in and save the people, because that's the way they're going to be known. The larger your life is and the more prominent you made your presence, the longer people were going to tell your story and remember you over time. Eventually, Christianity started becoming an influence and started moving into the area. So we do see in our first story we're going to read influences of Christianity, because you have to remember that this wasn't written down at first. It wasn't written down for many years after it was first told. So we're getting renditions of the same story that's being told time after time after time. So the story that we're going to see in the version that we're going to see, we can't necessarily say is the original version. It's the only version we have. And while we'll see a lot of Old English and Anglo-Saxon characteristics in that story, we're also going to see little sprinkles of Christianity and other influences, because whenever it was finally written down, Christianity was very prominent. So the first poem we're going to read together in this class is called Beowulf. It's an epic poem, which is a long narrative poem that tells the deeds of a hero and the journey of a hero. The earliest epic tales were told century to century, orally from person to person. And because they had to be told from poet to poet over time, they had to be easy to memorize, and they had to have some sort of pattern and excitability and entertainment value. Most of these stories were drawn from legends and myths that they had heard before. They include a lot of repetition. So not only are they repeating what they're saying and details over and over and over again, but they're also repeating words and the rhymes of the lines. You're also going to see a lot of great detail. They go into many lines of explanation and detailed description of what characters look like or what the setting looked like or what was happening. The heroes in Old English poetry are typically male, and typically they're of noble birth or high position. They're some sort of like famous or really well-respected status. The hero's characteristics often reflect the values of the society. The hero will perform courageous or even superhuman deeds. The action of the hero is going to determine the fate of the nation. So there's a lot of pressure. The setting is often vast in scope. So we're going to get a lot of different nations or different places. The poet uses very formal diction. So the choice of words that they use is very formal and sincere. Major characters are going to deliver long formal speeches, typically about themselves. Beowulf loves Beowulf. The plot is complicated and involves a lot of supernatural beings or events. And we're going to see a lot of timeless values such as courage and honor and inner strength. We see a lot of camaraderie. So being together as a group was really important because you wouldn't survive on your own. So you needed to have your group of people, and the larger your group of people, the better off you're going to be. And we're going to see a lot of celebration. These people celebrated their life in every moment because they didn't know, one, when it was going to end. They very much believed in fate. And, you know, when your life was bound to end, that's just the way it was, and you couldn't do anything to stop it. So they made sure that whenever they woke up every morning, that their entire day was full of purpose. Believe it or not, the epic structure has existed over time and has developed over time. Stories such as The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and even Harry Potter, those are epics because they tell of these heroes that go through these trials and tribulations and have to, whatever decisions they make or whatever their outcome is going to determine the fate of the rest of their nation. So I want you to think about what characteristics a hero has. What are the stereotypical characteristics of a hero? Is it someone who is endowed with great courage and strength? Is it somebody who is celebrated for their bold exploits and their adventures? And how does our main character, Beowulf, embody the values of this time period and of this society? Beowulf loves Beowulf. This is one of the most famous poems that has ever survived over time. And really, the concepts in it are timeless, so they can still be applied to what we see in our society and how our literature is even shaped today. So as we're reading, I want you to think about how this text applies to our own society today. But I want you to think about what is influencing the character and the plot and the conflicts.